They're big, and they're purebred. And out of the past, they're coming back.
Bison are one of the true iconic American species. You know, how many animals are on a nickel?
As Europeans moved in and the United States grew westward, the American bison was hunted to near extinction. A century ago, just over 1,000 remained in all of North America, most of them captured by ranchers. As few as 25 wild bison survived inside Yellowstone National Park.
Yellowstone's very important to the whole history of conservation of bison in North America because 2 centuries ago, bison populations were declining deliberately across the country. And Yellowstone was a remnant refuge of bison where they never were completely eliminated from the landscape.
Thanks to 100 years of conservation efforts, today there are an estimated 500,000 bison in the United States.
The American bison is really the first big conservation success that we can point to. If we had had an Endangered Species Act back in the late 1800s, bison sure would have qualified as an endangered species.
The restoration from 25 animals to nearly 500,000 at this point is a real remarkable story.
Part of the motivation for preserving bison was economic. Ranchers recognized that breeding these winter-hardy and relatively low-maintenance wild animals with cattle might result in an obedient and profitable hybrid.
In the late 1800s, when bison were on the brink of total extinction, 5 individual ranchers went out and they caught animals out on the landscape. Part of their motivation was to save the species. Unfortunately, genetically speaking, part of their motivation was also to try to crossbreed cattle with bison, which they did.
Livestock producers recognized the hardy nature of bison on the landscape, and they recognized that they were, big and tough and put up with the extreme conditions of the Great Plains quite well. And what they tried to do at that point in time that was interbreed cattle with bison to produce the ultimate range stock. They have a higher reproductive rate given a low tending on the part of the farmer and rancher.
Of all the bison in the U.S. today, the vast majority are still in private herds.
Well, only 30 to maybe 40,000 of those animals are in public herd. The vast majority of them are under private ownership for bison ranching purposes.
In Oklahoma, some 2,500 bison in this herd roam the Tallgrass Prairie Preserve, owned by the Nature Conservancy. The herd plays a key role in preserving this landscape, the world's largest protected remnant of tallgrass prairie.
The mission of the Nature Conservancy is to preserve biological diversity, and the best way, and perhaps the only way to do that with native ecosystems, is to get them operating as they used to. What were the forces of nature that created and maintained this landscape for eons? And in the Great Plains, it's all about grazing and fire.
Bison play an important role in our ecosystem in that they provide protein and food for many of the predators and scavengers. They also are modifiers of the plant community.
The remaining pieces of tallgrass prairie are just a fraction of what they used to be. This preserve, at 39,000 acres, cannot accommodate a herd larger than this one. Most of the time, the herd is left alone to wander across the prairie. But to properly manage the size of the herd and the health of the animals, they need to be corralled once a year. The main reason for the roundup is to control the population. Bulls become uncooperative when they grow too large and have to be culled and sold to market.
The other big reason that we do the roundup is so that we can treat our animals to prevent disease. So as you're watching the process, you'll see when an animal gets caught in a squeeze chute, they get several inoculations. Depending on what our veterinarian is recommending at that year, on what we think some of the bovine-related type diseases are, that's what we're trying to prevent.
Brucellosis is the primary concern. Bison are known carriers of the disease, which has basically been eradicated from domesticated cattle. A big worry for cattle ranchers is that bison will escape and carry brucellosis to their herds. The disease is a flashpoint between those who want to see wild bison roaming the landscape and cattle ranchers concerned about the health of their animals.
Brucellosis is a bacterial disease that affects the reproductive capability of animals, populations that become infected. It causes increased costs and lower production by the cattle operators.
Another aim of the Roundup is to monitor the genetics of the animals.
Yeah, what you'll see us doing is yanking tail hairs on our calves. 20 to 30 follicle samples is enough to run DNA analysis on these animals. It's CSI type technology. Snip off the excess hair, put them in a little coin envelope, just a small little miniature envelope, label the envelope with that individual animal's ID. We box them all up and send them to Texas A&M University.
The university examines the mitochondrial DNA for cattle genes, a hidden genetic marker many bison carry from the era 100 years ago when ranchers were breeding bison with cattle. If the animal tests positive for cattle genes, it is removed from the herd and sold at market. Keeping the bison free from cattle genes is important for the long-term survival of the species.
We'll never have 50 million bison again, but we should have, ample examples of what this native resource was like on the landscape before humans changed dramatically what the North America looks like. And it really points out that restoration is not a very short-term kind of a project. It can take a century of work to have a fully restored wildlife population.
A century after almost permanent extinction, bison are coming back. Real bison on their home turf.